Room 314 is asking for you again." Evelyn Hart looked up from her paperwork, snowflakes still melting in her dark hair from her walk through the hospital parking lot. The night shift supervisor, Margaret, stood in the doorway with that knowing look she'd been wearing for the past 3 weeks. "He's not asking for anything, Marg. He's been unconscious since they brought him in." "Then explain why his heart rate spikes every time you're on duty." Margaret's weathered hands placed a steaming cup of coffee on Evelyn's desk. "And why it drops to normal the moment you walk into his room." Evelyn's fingers paused over her keyboard. She'd noticed it too, the way the monitors seemed to calm when she entered, how his breathing would shift almost imperceptibly when she adjusted his blankets. But acknowledging it felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Coincidence," she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. The blizzard outside had been raging for 3 days now, the same storm that had deposited their mystery patient at their door. No identification, no family, no one looking for him. The paramedics found him unconscious near the interstate, hypothermic but alive. The doctors estimated he was in his mid-30s, well-built, with calloused hands that spoke of work despite his expensive clothes. They'd started calling him John Doe, the nameless man in room 314. Evelyn finished her rounds quickly that night, saving his room for last as she always did. Something about him drew her in, made her linger longer than necessary. Maybe it was the silence he carried, so different from the chaos that usually filled her days. Or maybe it was the way he looked peaceful, despite whatever trauma had landed him here. She pushed open his door quietly, though she knew nothing would wake him. The soft beeping of machines filled the space between them as she approached his bed. His face was turned toward the window where snow continued to fall in thick, hypnotic patterns. "Still fighting the storm out there," she said softly, checking his IV line. She always talked to unconscious patients. Some said they could hear, and it made the long nights feel less lonely. "Margaret thinks you're faking it, you know. Says you're just waiting for the right moment to open your eyes and charm your way out of here." His chest rose and fell steadily. She pulled back the thin hospital blanket to check his surgical dressing, where they'd removed fragments of glass from his abdomen. The wound was healing well, but it would leave a scar, a thin line across his ribs that would always remind him of whatever had happened that night. Her fingers worked carefully around the bandage, professional and precise. But when her fingertips accidentally brushed against his warm skin, something electric shot through her. She froze, her hand still resting against his abdomen, feeling the subtle shift in his breathing. For a moment, she could have sworn she felt him respond, not consciously, but something deeper. His muscles seemed to relax under her touch, as if her presence was exactly what he'd been waiting for. "I don't know what happened to you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "But you're safe now. Whatever you're running from, whatever you're hiding from, it can't reach you here." She finished changing his dressing, her movements gentler than necessary. There was something about him that made her want to protect him, this stranger who'd appeared in her life like a ghost from the snow. In 3 years of nursing, she'd never felt this connected to a patient. As she prepared to leave, she did something she'd never done before. She reached out and brushed a strand of dark hair from his forehead, her touch lingering for just a moment longer than appropriate. "Good night, John," she said softly. She was almost to the door when she heard it, so quiet. She almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. A sound somewhere between a sigh and a whisper, barely more than breath. But it sounded like her name. "Evelyn." She spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. His eyes were still closed, his breathing unchanged. The monitors showed no variation in his vital signs. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, except now she knew, with absolute certainty, that John Doe was no ordinary patient. And somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly who she was. "You're awake." The voice belonged to someone he didn't recognize, yet it felt like coming home. John, though that name felt foreign on his tongue, opened his eyes to find a woman with kind but guarded eyes standing beside his bed. Dark hair pulled back, white coat over scrubs, and something in her expression that suggested she'd been watching him for longer than was strictly professional. His voice came out as a croak. How long had he been unconscious? Where am I? St. Mary's Hospital. You've been here for 3 weeks. She moved with practiced efficiency, checking his pupils with a small flashlight. I'm Evelyn. I've been taking care of you. Evelyn. The name sparked something warm in his chest, though he couldn't place why. Everything else was a blank canvas. No memories, no identity, nothing but the sound of her voice and the way her presence seemed to quiet the chaos in his mind. 3 weeks, he repeated, testing the words. I don't remember anything, not even my name. The doctors said, that might happen. Head trauma can cause temporary amnesia. She stepped back, maintaining professional distance, but he caught the flicker of something else in her eyes. Relief, concern. We've been calling you John. John. He tried the name again, rolling it around like an ill-fitting coat. And you're? Evelyn. The way he said her name made her pause. Too familiar, too intimate for a patient she'd just met officially. But he was looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had lost all meaning. A soft knock interrupted the moment. A young man peered around the door, barely out of his teens, with nervous eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Sorry, Miss Hart. I brought fresh linens like you asked. His accent carried the musical lilt of Central America, and there was something cautious about the way he moved, like someone used to staying invisible. Thank you, Luis. Just set them on the chair. Evelyn's tone was gentle with the boy, protective even. Luis helps with maintenance around here, she explained to John. He's studying to become a nurse himself. Luis nodded shyly, but as his gaze landed on John, his expression shifted. The linen slipped from his hands as his face went pale. Miss Hart, he whispered, his voice tight with shock. I need to talk to you, now. Evelyn frowned at the urgency in his tone. Luis, please, it's important. She glanced between Luis and John, clearly torn. I'll be right back, she told John, following Luis into the hallway. John stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together fragments that wouldn't come. Everything felt like looking through frosted glass, shapes and shadows without definition. Except for Evelyn. She was crystal clear, the one bright point in a world of fog. Minutes passed before she returned, and when she did, her entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the warm, caring nurse. In her place stood someone cold, professional, distant. The physical therapist will be by this afternoon to help you start walking, she said without meeting his eyes. Your body has been immobile for weeks. We need to rebuild your strength gradually. Evelyn, what's wrong? He could feel the shift between them like a physical wall. What did he tell you? Nothing that concerns you right now. You need to focus on recovery. She busied herself with his chart, her movements sharp and efficient. Dr. Rodriguez will want to run more tests on your memory. But John was already swinging his legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the protest of muscles that hadn't been used in weeks. Whatever he said, let me explain. Explain what? You don't remember anything, remember? Her words were cutting, but he caught the hurt underneath. He stood too quickly, and the world tilted sideways. Evelyn moved instinctively. To catch him, her professional reflexes overriding her anger. For a moment they were pressed together, his hands gripping her shoulders, her arms around his waist to steady him. This close, he could smell her shampoo, something clean and floral that cut through the antiseptic hospital air. Her warmth seeped through his thin hospital gown, and for the first time since waking up, he felt like he could breathe properly. You smell like home, he whispered without thinking, the words falling from his lips like a confession. She stiffened in his arms, but didn't pull away immediately. "You don't know what home smells like. You don't remember." "I remember you." The certainty in his voice surprised them both. "Not how I know you or why, but I remember the feeling of you, like you've been keeping me safe." Her breath hitched, and for a moment her walls cracked. He saw longing there, and fear, and something that looked like grief. Then she stepped back, rebuilding her defenses. "You need to get back in bed. You're not strong enough." "I'm strong enough." He stayed where he was, studying her face. "What I'm not strong enough for is whatever's happening between us. This distance you've put up since you came back in here." "There is no us," she said firmly, but her voice shook slightly. "You're my patient, that's all." "Then why do you look at me like you're afraid I'll disappear again?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Evelyn's composure finally cracked, and he saw the woman beneath the nurse, vulnerable, hurting, and inexplicably connected to him in ways neither of them understood. "Because," she said quietly, "I think you already have. And I think whatever Louise showed me is just the beginning of finding out how much I've lost." She turned toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. "There are things about you that you might not want to remember, John. Things that might change how you see yourself, how others see you, and how you see me." She looked back at him then, and he saw the war playing out behind her eyes, duty against desire, protection against truth. "I don't know yet, but I'm afraid to find out." After she left, John sank back onto the bed, his body trembling from exhaustion and something deeper. Whatever Louise had shown her, whatever truth had built this wall between them, he knew with absolute certainty that losing Evelyn would be worse than losing his memory, because even without his past, he was falling, in love with his guardian angel, and she was already pulling away, Callum Price. Evelyn's voice was ice as she entered his room the next morning, a tablet clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "CEO of Aeon Technologies, net worth approximately $12 billion, missing for 4 weeks after a corporate scandal that destroyed thousands of lives." John, Callum, felt the name hit him like a physical blow. Fragments flickered through his mind. Boardrooms, signatures on documents, the weight of decisions that moved markets. But it all felt like watching someone else's life through a dirty window. "I don't remember?" Her laugh was bitter. "How convenient. Just like you don't remember authorizing the data breach that leaked personal information of 3 million users, or the illegal surveillance programs, or the employees who disappeared when they tried to speak out." She thrust the tablet toward him, showing a news article with his photo. The man in the picture looked like him, but older, harder, wearing a $1,000 suit and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "That's not me." The words came out instinctively, even as his reflection stared back at him from the screen. "DNA doesn't lie. Neither do fingerprints." She pulled the tablet back, her professional mask slipping to reveal raw pain underneath. "The question is, are you really suffering from amnesia, or is this just another corporate strategy?" The accusation stung more than it should have. "You think I'm faking this? That I chose to wake up with no memory, no identity, nothing but what? Nothing but you." The admission hung between them, honest and desperate. "You're the only thing that feels real to me, the only thing that makes sense in this mess." Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, maybe hope, but her walls stayed firmly in place. "Very touching. I'm sure that line works well in boardrooms." The coldness in her voice ignited something fierce in his chest. In 3 quick strides, he closed the distance between them, backing her against the wall beside the small rest area. His hands braced on either side of her head, not trapping but creating a space that belonged only to them. "You want to know what I remember?" His voice was low, rough with emotion. I remember the sound of your voice in the dark. I remember feeling safe for the first time in God knows how long. I remember your touch making me want to fight my way back to consciousness. Her breathing had quickened, and he could see the pulse hammering at her throat. That doesn't change what you did. Maybe not, but it changes how I feel about you. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. You hate me for something I can't remember doing, but you kiss me like I haven't kissed you, haven't you? He leaned closer, close enough that their breath mingled. Every time you look at me, every gentle touch when you think I'm unconscious, every moment you linger in this room longer than you need to, you've been kissing me with everything but your lips. You're delusional. But her voice was barely a whisper, and she hadn't pushed him away. Then prove it. The challenge was soft, almost tender. Kiss me. Show me how much you hate the man I used to be. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then Evelyn surged forward, her mouth crashing against his with a violence that spoke of months of suppressed emotion. It wasn't gentle or sweet. It was anger and longing and desperation all tangled together. He responded immediately, his hands sliding from the wall to cup her face, his body pressing closer as she kissed him like she was trying to punish them, both. Her fingers fisted in his hospital gown, pulling him against her, even as she bit his lower lip hard enough to sting. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her lips were swollen from the force of their kiss. I hate you, she whispered, but her hands were still clutching his gown, still holding him close. I know. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, catching a tear that had escaped. But you don't hate this. You don't hate us. There is no us. She pushed him away then, rebuilding her walls with visible effort. There's a billionaire with blood on his hands, and a nurse who should know better. And what if I'm not him anymore? What if whoever I was died in that accident, and this is... Who's left? People don't get to reinvent themselves just because it's convenient. But there was less conviction in her voice now, more uncertainty. Don't they? He stayed where she'd pushed him, giving her space, but not backing down. You said yourself, that trauma can change someone completely. What if losing my memory isn't a curse? What if it's a chance to become someone worth loving? The words hit their target. He saw her armor crack, saw the woman underneath who wanted to believe in second chances and redemption. It doesn't matter what I want to believe, she said finally. Because even if you have changed, the damage is already done. The people you hurt, the lives you destroyed, they can't be undone by amnesia. She moved toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. And just so you know, my daughter worked for your company. She was one of the whistleblowers who tried to expose what you were doing. Her voice broke slightly. She disappeared. 3 days before the story broke. No one has seen her since. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He sank onto the edge of the bed, understanding now the depth of her pain, the personal nature of her hatred. Evelyn, save it. She opened the door, then looked back one last time. That kiss? It wasn't because I don't hate you. It was because I hate myself for wanting someone who might have killed my daughter. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Callum alone with the weight of a past he couldn't remember and a future that felt increasingly impossible. But even through the pain, one truth remained clear. He was falling in love with Evelyn Hart. And somehow, he had to find a way to deserve her love in return, even if it meant confronting a monster he couldn't remember being. Outside his window, the snow had finally stopped falling. But inside, the storm was just beginning. The dreams came in fragments. Boardroom arguments, late-night phone calls, a young woman's face twisted with betrayal. Callum woke, gasping, sweat-soaked sheets clinging to his skin as pieces of his Former life slammed back into focus with merciless clarity. He remembered her now. Sarah Hart, 26 years old, brilliant programmer, idealistic enough to believe she could change the world from inside a corporate machine. And he had destroyed her for it. The nightmares are getting worse. Luis stood in the doorway holding a breakfast tray, his expression sympathetic but wary. Over the past few days, the young man had become an unlikely confidant, perhaps because he understood what it meant to be invisible, forgotten by systems that chewed up the vulnerable. "They're not nightmares," Callum said quietly, accepting the coffee with trembling hands. "They're memories, and they're worse than anything my imagination could create." Luis set the tray down and glanced toward the door before speaking in low, urgent tones. "I've been researching. The official story. It doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "The orders that destroyed Miss Evelyn's daughter, the surveillance programs, the data breach, they all happened when you were supposedly traveling. But I found airline records, hotel receipts. You were in meetings with lawyers those weeks trying to stop something." Callum frowned, trying to reconcile this information with the guilt eating at his chest. "That's impossible. I signed the authorizations myself. I remember." "Do you? Or do you remember what someone wanted you to remember?" Luis pulled out a tablet, showing him internal company emails. "Look at the digital signatures, the timestamps. Someone with administrative access was using your credentials." The evidence was damning, but in the opposite direction than Callum had expected. His memories were real, but incomplete, edited to make him feel responsible for decisions he'd actually tried to prevent. "Carla Donovan," he whispered, as another fragment clicked into place. "My second in command. She always said I was too soft for business. She's been running Aeon since you disappeared. Stock prices have never been higher." The betrayal cut deep, but it was nothing compared to the relief. If Luis was right, if he hadn't been the monster responsible for Sarah's disappearance, "I have to tell Evelyn. She won't believe you. Not without proof." Luis hesitated, then continued. "But there might be a way. Sarah Hart wasn't killed. She was taken, hidden away where she couldn't talk. If we can find her." Hope blazed in Callum's chest, the first real hope he'd felt since waking up. "Where? I don't know yet. But I have contacts. People who help others disappear when they need to. If she's alive, we can find her." Before Callum could respond, the door opened and Evelyn entered, her professional mask firmly in place. But he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders carried the weight of grief and sleepless nights. "Physical therapy," she announced curtly. "You've been cleared for more intensive movement." Luis melted away as he always did when authority figures appeared, but not before giving Callum a meaningful look. The investigation would continue, but for now, Callum had to focus on the woman who looked at him like he'd personally torn her world apart. The therapy room was down the hall, a sterile space filled with equipment designed to rebuild broken bodies. Evelyn worked with mechanical precision, guiding him through exercises that pushed his recovering muscles to their limits. "Your strength is returning faster than expected," she noted, making notes on her chart. "Another week, and you'll be cleared for discharge." The thought of leaving, of never seeing her again, sent panic coursing through him. "Evelyn, about yesterday. We're not discussing yesterday. About your daughter. We're especially not discussing my daughter." Her voice cracked slightly on the words, and she turned away to fidget with the equipment. He moved behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. "What if I told you there might be hope?" "Hope?" She spun around, her professional composure finally shattering. "Hope that you might remember where you buried her body? Hope that you might feel guilty enough to tell me what you did to her? Hope that she might still be alive?" The words hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Evelyn's face cycled through disbelief, desperate longing, and bitter protection against false promises. Don't. Her voice was barely a whisper. Don't you dare give me hope, unless you're absolutely certain. I'm not certain of anything except this. He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her face, but not quite touching. I remember fragments now, pieces of what happened, and I don't think I'm the man you believe. I am? Then who are you? Someone who fell in love with a woman brave enough to care for a stranger. Someone who would do anything to bring her daughter home safe. This time, when their lips met, it was different. Not the angry desperation of yesterday, but something deeper. A kiss born of shared pain and tentative hope. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, and he could feel her barriers crumbling. They broke apart when footsteps echoed in the hallway, springing apart like guilty teenagers. But the connection remained, electric and undeniable. If you're lying to me, she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. If this is some game to manipulate me, then I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, he promised. But Evelyn, what if it's not? What if everything you think you know is wrong? Before she could answer, Luis appeared in the doorway, his face pale with excitement and fear. Miss Hard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see. He held up his phone, his hands shaking slightly. I found a video message. It's from your daughter, and she's alive. The tablet slipped from Evelyn's numb fingers, clattering to the floor as Sarah's face filled the screen. Older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. The message was brief, coded, but clear enough. She was in hiding, protected by people who understood the danger she faced. Evelyn sank into a nearby chair, her hand pressed to her mouth as sobs shook her shoulders. Callum knelt beside her, offering his presence as an anchor in the storm of emotions. She's alive, Evelyn gasped between tears. My baby is alive. And we're going to bring her home, Callum promised, his hand covering hers. Whatever it takes. Whoever I have to face from my past, we're going to bring her home. For the first time since he'd awakened, Callum felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving. He had someone to save, someone to love, and a chance to become the man Evelyn deserved. But first, he had to face the woman who had stolen his life and nearly destroyed the only person who mattered. Carla Donovan was about to discover that some memories once recovered came with a thirst for justice. The board meeting is tonight. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. Luis spread surveillance photos across the small table in the hospital's unused storage room. 3 days of planning had led to this moment, a desperate gambit to expose Carla Donovan and find Sarah before Aeon's quarterly meeting sealed the cover-up permanently. Security will be minimal, Luis continued, pointing to the building schematics. Most guards will be focused on the boardroom. If we can get to Carla's office, access her computer. The encryption keys are in her personal safe, Callum added, studying the layout with the sharp focus of recovered memory. Behind the Monet reproduction, code is her daughter's birthday, 847. Evelyn looked between them, her medical training warring with her desperation to find Sarah. This is insane. You're barely recovered from major trauma, and we're talking about breaking into one of the most secure buildings in the city. We have the advantage of surprise, Callum argued. Carla thinks I'm dead or permanently disabled. She won't expect me to show up at the company I supposedly ran into the ground. And if you're wrong? If this is a trap? Callum reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Then at least we'll know Sarah's location before they move her again. Luis found the shipping manifests. They're planning to transfer her tomorrow night. This is our only window. The weight of decision settled over Evelyn's shoulders. Everything in her rational mind screamed that this was reckless, dangerous, likely to end in disaster. But the mother in her, the part that had spent months grieving, a daughter who was still alive, couldn't let this chance slip away. What do you need me to do? Get us inside, Luis said. Hospital credentials will get us past the first checkpoint. After that, Callum can use executive access codes to reach the upper floors. If they haven't been changed. They haven't, Callum said with grim certainty. Carla's arrogant. She thinks she's won completely. She'll want to maintain the illusion that everything is normal. 2 hours later, they sat in Luis's borrowed van outside the Aeon Technologies tower, watching the controlled chaos of a corporate building preparing for its most important quarterly meeting. Callum had found clothes that fit, dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look like a tech worker rather than a patient. Last chance to change your mind, Evelyn said, though her own resolve had hardened into determination. Are you having second thoughts? He asked. About the plan? Yes. About this? She gestured between them, encompassing everything that had grown between a nameless patient and his devoted nurse. Never. The admission hung in the air between them. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a woman buried in routine and grief. Now she was preparing to commit multiple felonies for a man she was falling in love with. If this goes wrong, it won't, he interrupted. But if it does, if something happens to you. She struggled with words that felt too large, too frightening to voice. I can't lose anyone else, Callum. I can't lose you too. He cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if memorizing every detail. You're not going to lose me, but just in case. He leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers with the reverence of a man who had found something sacred. This kiss was different from all the others. Not desperate or angry or confused, but certain. A promise made without words, a declaration that transcended the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. Kiss me like we're going to live, she whispered against his lips, echoing words that felt prophetic. We are going to live, he murmured back, deepening the kiss until Luis cleared his throat uncomfortably from the driver's seat. Not to interrupt, but the shift change happens in 5 minutes. They broke apart reluctantly, but the connection remained, an invisible thread that would guide them through whatever came next. The infiltration went smoother than expected. Evelyn's medical credentials and confident demeanor got them past security, while Callum's inside knowledge navigated them through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times in another life. The executive elevator responded to his thumbprint. Apparently, Carla's arrogance extended to basic security protocols. The 32nd floor was eerily quiet. Most staff pulled into the boardroom presentation 20 floors below. Carla's corner office stood open, her computer still logged in as she prepared for her moment of triumph. She always was overconfident, Callum muttered, sliding behind the desk while Luis kept watch at the door. The files were exactly where he'd expected, encrypted but accessible with the right permissions. Financial records showing massive profits from illegal surveillance contracts. Personnel files detailing the systematic elimination of whistleblowers, and buried deep in a folder marked Asset Management. Sarah's location. Portland, he breathed. Safe house 30 miles outside the city. They've been holding her as leverage in case any of the other programmers decided to come forward. Download everything, Evelyn urged. We need enough evidence to… Well, look what crawled out of the grave. They spun toward the voice, to find Carla Donovan standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. Tall, elegant, with silver hair and cold eyes that had calculated the destruction of lives with the same precision she applied to quarterly projections. Hello, Carla, Callum said calmly, his hand moving subtly toward the transmitter Luis had hidden in his jacket. Enjoying my company? Oh, I've improved it considerably since your unfortunate accident. Her smile was shark-like as she stepped into the office. Though I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people don't survive attempted murder quite so gracefully. Attempted murder? Evelyn's voice was sharp with shock. Did he not mention? Poor Callum here got a little too curious about where the real profits were coming from. Started asking uncomfortable questions about employee retention and data usage. So we arranged a little driving accident on a snowy night. The transmitter in Callum's jacket was already broadcasting, sending every word to Luis's contacts in the media and law enforcement. But Carla was still talking, still confessing, and he needed her to implicate herself completely. "And Sarah Hart?" he asked. "Insurance policy. Amazing how cooperative people become when you're holding their children, though I suspect we won't need that particular asset much longer." The threat was clear, and Evelyn stepped forward with fury blazing in her eyes. "You!" Psychotic. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Callum felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him around as pain exploded through his chest. He hit the floor hard, his vision graying as Evelyn's scream echoed. In his ears, "Callum!" She was beside him instantly, her hands pressing against the wound as training took over. "Stay with me. Look at me." Through the haze of pain and blood loss, he managed to focus on her face. Beautiful, fierce, terrified. The face of the woman who had become his anchor in a world gone mad. "The drive," he whispered, pressing the USB stick into her hand. "Get it. To Luis. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Sarah needs." The world was fading, but not before he saw Luis appear behind Carla, a fire extinguisher in his hands. The last thing Callum heard before darkness claimed him was the satisfying sound of Carla hitting the floor and Evelyn's voice calling his name like a prayer. The evidence was out. Sarah's location was known, and somehow, against all odds, love had found a way to triumph over corporate greed and calculated evil. Now all that remained was surviving long enough to see it through. 3 months later, Callum stood in the courthouse steps watching Carla Donovan being led away in handcuffs. The media circus around the Aon Technologies scandal had finally died down, replaced by the quieter work of justice actually being served. His shoulder still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of that night in the corporate tower. But the scar had healed cleanly, thanks to a certain skilled nurse who had refused to leave his side during the entire recovery. 15 years, Luis said, joining him on the steps with a tablet full of news coverage. "They're saying it could have been life if not for the cooperation agreement." Callum nodded, watching the woman who had orchestrated so much destruction disappear into the federal transport vehicle. He felt empty somehow, not satisfied, not vindicated, just tired. "Any word from Portland?" Luis smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Callum had seen from the young man since they'd met. "Sarah's flight lands in 2 hours. Miss Evelyn? Left for the airport 30 minutes ago." The reunion had been planned carefully. Sarah Hart had spent months in protective custody, testifying against the network of corruption that had spread far beyond Aon Technologies. Her evidence had brought down 3 other tech companies and led to congressional hearings on corporate surveillance. But she was finally coming home. "And your citizenship hearing?" "Next month," Luis said proudly. "The immigration lawyer thinks my role in exposing the conspiracy will help. Turns out being a whistleblower has its advantages." He'd enrolled in nursing school with a full scholarship funded by the settlement money from Aon's bankruptcy. Justice had its own way of balancing the scales. "I should get back," Luis continued. "Professor Martinez wants us to practice IV insertions before tomorrow's exam." After he left, Callum remained on the courthouse steps, watching the city move around him with the strange detachment of someone who had been dead and come back to life. Everything felt different now. Colors more vivid, sounds more distinct, as if his brain had been rewired during those weeks of unconsciousness. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. The last of the civil suits had been settled. His personal assets, frozen during the investigation, were being released. He was once again a wealthy man, though the fortune felt hollow without someone to share it with. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his first life accumulating money and power, only to lose everything when that power was turned against him. Now he had a chance to rebuild, but all he really wanted was to hear Evelyn laugh again. She'd been different since the shooting, more careful with her words, more guarded with her emotions, professional even when they were alone together. As if she'd built new walls to protect herself from caring too much about someone who lived in such a dangerous world. He understood. He even respected it. But it didn't make the distance any easier to bear. His phone rang as he walked back to his hotel. Evelyn's number. "She's beautiful." Evelyn's voice was thick with tears, but happy tears for once. Older, changed, but still my little girl. "How is she handling everything?" "Better than I expected." "Angry about the lost time, but grateful to be alive. She wants to meet you." The admission surprised him. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "I've told her everything. About the hospital, about what you did to save her, about..." She paused, searching for words. "About us." "And?" "She says anyone brave enough to take a bullet for her mother deserves a chance to explain himself." Despite everything, Callum found himself smiling. Smart woman, she gets that from her mother. "Dinner tomorrow? My apartment? Nothing fancy, just..." Another pause. "Just family." The word hit him unexpectedly hard. Family. Something he'd never really had, never thought he wanted. But the idea of belonging somewhere, of being part of something larger than corporate acquisitions and profit margins, sent warmth spreading through his chest. "I'd be honored." 7 o'clock. "And Callum? Thank you. For everything." The line went dead, leaving him standing on a busy sidewalk with tears he hadn't expected stinging his eyes. The next evening, he stood outside Evelyn's apartment building, holding a bottle of wine and fighting nerves that had nothing to do with facing down corporate corruption. This was different. This was personal. Sarah Hart opened the door, 26 years old, with her mother's eyes and a programmer's precision in the way she studied him. She was thinner than in the photos, marked by months of stress and hiding, but very much alive. "So, you're the man who broke into our lives," she said without preamble. "Sarah!" Evelyn's voice called from the kitchen, but there was amusement in it. "It's all right," Callum said. "She has every right to be suspicious." Sarah stepped aside to let him in, but continued her assessment. "Mom says you don't remember being the person who destroyed our family." "I remember fragments. Enough to know that the man I was made terrible choices. But not enough to feel like that person anymore." "Convenient, Sarah." This time Evelyn's voice carried warning as she emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "It's fine," Callum said again. "I'd rather have her honest than polite." He handed the wine to Evelyn, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent electricity up his arm, and from the way her breath caught, she felt it too. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Sarah proved to be as brilliant as her reputation suggested, walking him through the technical details of how Carla had manipulated the surveillance systems. But more than that, she was funny, irreverent, and clearly devoted to her mother. "The safe house was actually quite nice," she was saying over dessert. "Like a tech workers' retreat center. They had me debugging code for their legitimate clients to pass the time." "Didn't you try to escape?" Callum asked. "Once. But then they explained very clearly what would happen to Mom if I disappeared." Her expression darkened. "After that, I focused on gathering evidence instead of running." "She recorded everything," Evelyn said proudly. "Audio, video, financial records. The prosecutors say it's the most comprehensive corporate crime documentation they've ever seen." "I learned from the best," Sarah said, raising her wine glass toward Callum. "Turns out, working for a corrupt CEO teaches you exactly how corruption works." They all laughed, and for a moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like a family sharing dinner and stories, connected by love rather than circumstance. Later, as Sarah helped her mother clear dishes, Callum stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the city. The lights below blurred into abstract patterns, beautiful in their randomness. "She likes you." He turned to find Evelyn beside him, close enough to touch but maintaining that careful distance she'd perfected. She's remarkable. You raised an incredible woman. I had help. She raised herself in a lot of ways. Evelyn leaned against the railing, studying his profile. Can I ask you something? Always. What happens now? The trial is over, Sarah's safe, the bad guys are in prison. What do you do with a second chance at life? It was the question that had been haunting him for weeks. I don't know, he admitted. Everything I thought I wanted before. It all seems meaningless now. So what does have meaning? He turned to face her fully, his heart hammering against his ribs. You. This. The possibility that a broken man might be worth loving. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Callum, I know you're scared. I know trusting me feels impossible after everything that happened, but I need you to know. Falling in love with you saved my life in every way that matters. I'm not scared of loving you, she whispered. I'm scared of losing you. To another conspiracy, another enemy, another bullet meant for someone who dares to tell the truth. Then let me prove to you that some fights are worth the risk. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The ring inside was simple, elegant. A single diamond that caught the city lights and threw them back like promises. Marry me, he said quietly. Not because it's expected or convenient or rational. Marry me because you love me despite every logical reason not to. Marry me because life is unpredictable and dangerous and beautiful, and I want to face all of it with you. Evelyn stared at the ring, then at him, her expression cycling through shock, terror, and wonder. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. We've known each other for 4 months. You were unconscious for half of that time. I've been unconscious for most of my life, he countered. You woke me up. You made me want to be better than I was, stronger than I thought possible. You made me want to deserve a second chance. She was quiet for so long that he began to think he'd misjudged everything. Then she reached out and touched his face, her thumb tracing the scar where Carla's bullet had grazed his temple. Ask me again in a year, she said softly, when we've had time to build something real without bullets and corporate conspiracies and federal investigations. And then, her smile was radiant, transforming her entire face. And then I'll say yes, because you're right. Some fights are worth the risk, and some silences are worth breaking. He slipped the ring back into his pocket, but pulled her into his arms instead. This kiss was different from all the others, not desperate or angry or fearful, but full of possibility. A kiss that tasted like hope and felt like coming home. When they broke apart, Sarah was watching them from the doorway with undisguised approval. About time, she said. I was starting to think you two would dance around each other forever. We're taking it slow, Evelyn said, but she didn't step out of Callum's arms. Good plan, but not too slow. I want nieces and nephews before I'm 30. Evelyn blushed furiously while Callum laughed, the first truly carefree sound he could remember making. Standing there on the balcony with snow beginning to fall and the woman he loved in his arms, he finally understood what peace felt like. 6 months later, he returned to that same balcony with the same ring and the same question. This time, Evelyn's answer was immediate and joyful and loud enough to wake the neighbors, because some silences were meant to be broken, and some love stories were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seemed. He had been the silence in her life, the pause between heartbeats, the space between words where hope lived. But when she kissed him on their wedding day, she taught him how to live out loud, and they did together, for all the years that followed.